While bass fishing in the winter can be some of the most brutal conditions, if you fish it and prepare for it right, you can catch the biggest bass of your life. And these are 5 baits that help me catch big bass in the wintertime. And the first winter fishing bait that I fish with the least, but you should fish with the most because it is the best, is the umbrella rig. I don't ever throw one because we're not allowed to throw one in pro tournaments. But if you're not a pro angler and you're fishing lower level tournaments that allow you to throw an Alabama rig, it is something that will always be tied on in my boat during the wintertime especially. I'm gonna throw small lures on it, 3.2 inch swim baits, something like a G-Crack Gyro Star, 1/8 ounce jig heads. I always like to throw lighter jig heads than most people because people think, oh, I'm gonna throw a 1/4 or 3/8 1/2 ounce jig head. Well, you've got 5 of them. So having small weights is key, being able to control the bait, reel it slow, and not have it get hung on the bottom and things like that. So live scope, a rig, cannot go wrong in the wintertime. But that's all I'm gonna say about it. The second lure I'm gonna talk about is probably the most OG of the group. It's been around forever. You gotta keep it simple, the jig. When I'm fishing a jig in the wintertime, I'm always wanting to throw a compact jig. This is just a 3/8 ounce ball head jig. I've got the skirt trimmed, and I have your typical chunk style trailer on the back. Even that is a small one. I'm not wanting a jig that's got a lot of action and flapping and moving. You gotta remember the water is cold, the bass and the forage is typically lethargic, and you're gonna want something that's gonna fish slow on the bottom. Things I'm gonna key in on, I'm gonna be fishing bluff walls, transition banks, bluff ends, and really just flipping it along the bluff, working it down those rocks really, really slow. Typically, I'm not casting it, fishing offshore or anything like that. Another thing, if there's docks, deeper docks on rock banks, always trying to key in on rock if it's available with the jig. Those are what I look for, and probably has caught more big fish in the wintertime than any other bait. It's just been around for a while. It's been a killer. It's been successful for a long time. And a jig is something I always have tied on in the winter. For colors on a jig in the wintertime, I'm gonna throw 2 colors. If it's super muddy, I'm gonna be throwing a black and blue. And if it's just a little bit clear or even kind of edging towards that clear water, I'm gonna throw a green pumpkin of some variation. This is a green pumpkin orange, some type of green pumpkin purple, green pumpkin blue. But green pumpkin is the one I would say you can't go wrong with. They'll bite it in dirty water. I just like something a little bit darker, maybe with some sapphire and that super mud. Keep it simple, green pumpkin, black and blue, only 2 colors you need in the winter. The third lure that I'm gonna put in my arsenal for the wintertime is the suspending jerkbait. When selecting the right jerkbait, it really just depends on the depth. But with live scope forward-facing sonar, the ability to control your bait and know what depth it's at is really key. I typically like to throw a deeper running jerkbait rather than a shallower one, but big key, I always try to keep the bait above the fish. If I'm looking at these fish on live scope, if they're sitting on a brush pile, I never want the bait to get below them. I want them to feed up. They're a predatory fish. If the bait is above them, they feel like they have an advantage and are more likely to bite that bait. Another thing in the wintertime, slower is almost always better. If we're fishing in temps above 50 degrees, you can get by with really twitching the bait hard. If I'm fishing sub 50 degree temps, especially in the south, don't be afraid to throw that bait out there, twitch it down, and sometimes if there's a fish around it, I'll give it a 15, 20 second pause. If you look at what guys have done in the past, you look at like George Cochran on Lake Gunnersville back in the early 2000s or late 90s, he was letting the jerkbait 60 seconds at a time. Now I typically don't have the patience for that, but letting the jerkbait sit longer than you think you should, especially in the wintertime, is a great way to generate bites. If you don't have live scope, I would encourage to throw the jerkbait in areas that you're very familiar with. It does have a lot of treble hooks. It dives, it ducks, it dodges. It's a hangy bait, right? And so I would maybe fish the spot first with a worm, crankbait, chatterbait, kind of learn the depth that you're trying to desire your jerkbait to get to. And then it takes a lot of practice. If you're not using live scope, knowing how deep your jerkbait getting is kind of an art form. If you're not getting it deep enough, one tip I can tell you, downsize line. I typically throw it on 12-pound fluorocarbon. If I'm really trying to get it deep, I'll downsize to 10-pound fluorocarbon. And then again, if I'm throwing it around heavy cover and I want it to stay up, I might go up to 14, maybe even 17 pound fluorocarbon if I'm in dirty water around heavy grass. In conclusion with the jerkbait, fishing it slower is typically better than fishing it faster in the wintertime. Another tip, watch your line. A lot of times these fish will thump it and swim off because you're gonna have slack in your line, and watching your line, seeing that bite can be the difference in catching and missing the fish of a lifetime. So suspending jerkbait, make sure you're throwing it in the wintertime. Number 4 in the wintertime, a bait that I love to throw almost more as a hobby for myself, it's the glide bait. For the most part, the glide bait for tournament applications, I wouldn't highly encourage it. We've seen some guys have some crazy success in tournaments, but we've also seen guys get burned with it. I look at like Carl Jocumsen having 30-pound bags and then committing to the glide bait the next day and having tough days. Ben Milliken doing the same. These are guys that I think have done tournament glide baiting as good as anybody, but it's also burned them in the same type of ways. So understanding when to and when not to throw the glide bait is really important. It's something that I will try a little bit every day, but I will just to keep it honest, because there are those special days where the fish really want to feed up. They want to feed on big bait and they become very opportunistic, and there's what we call bite windows for that. But when you're not in one of those said bite windows, a glide bait's one of those things that you're going to see followers. It's going to kind of hook you in and make you want to throw it more, but it can be the demise of your day. However, me personally, if I am fun fishing on a lake around here, I'm gonna throw the glide bait because I just feel like I'm on the edge of catching the fish of a lifetime, because I am. Big fish, love big baits. You know, the last bait we just talked about is a jerk bait, and this is essentially, in a way, a giant jerk bait. Now, this is no giant glide bait by any means, but throwing these big glide baits, you're fishing them in a lot of the same places you would throw a jerk bait. It has a lot of draw power for these fish, and I typically like to fish it very slow, just like the jerk bait. I'm gonna glide it incredibly big, give it some good pauses. So make sure if you're gonna throw a glide bait, you're gonna throw a bait that as you fish it slow, it's staying perfectly horizontal in the water column. It's not trying to nosedive on you, because these are things, especially in cold water, that are gonna deter strikes. You'll still get some follows, but it's gonna cause fish to not commit. Glide baiting in itself is such an art form, and it takes so much time to master. You have to kind of go out and explore it for yourself, and every body of water fish is different. But when I'm throwing this bait, I'm throwing it on points, I'm throwing it on bluff ends, and I'm throwing it over brush or standing timber. Those are the kind of areas I'm keying in on for myself during the wintertime. Again, I wanna encourage you, if you're a tournament angler, don't live and die by this bait. You can keep it honest, but it will burn you more than it will help you. But if you're going fun fishing and looking to catch the bass of a lifetime, a glide bait is probably the most fun way to do it. And last but certainly not least, when it comes to catching fish in the wintertime, it's the Demi Rig. This bait right here will generate more bites than any other when it comes to wintertime tactics in the right scenarios. Fish in the wintertime, they're lethargic. A lot of times they're in deep water haunts, they're chasing bait. And in a really cold weather event, you're gonna get what they call a shad die-off. It's when the water temperature drops incredibly rapidly, which it happens a lot in the wintertime. The shad, their bodies cannot handle it. And some of them die. Other ones, while they don't die, they begin to struggle. They're on the edge of life, and bass see this opportunity. It's essentially Thanksgiving feast, Christmas feast, all rolled into one. So you're gonna want a bait that imitates a dying shad. You don't want something with a ton of action. You don't want something that's gonna move fast. And you want something finessey on light line. You gotta realize they can swim right up to these shad, get as good of a look as they want to. That shad's not gonna swim away, and then they're gonna eat it. So something like a mid-stroll or a Demi Rig is a great way to imitate that. This right here, it's a really simple rig. I've got a jig head, 90-degree line tie, very important, and a G-Crack revival shad on here. Whatever the size of the shad that they're feeding on, I'm gonna try to match the bait to that lengthwise. So for fishing it like a Demi, I'm gonna drop it vertical on these fish, typically very deep, 20 foot to 40, 45 feet. Fish I'm seeing on 2D sonar. Yet again, I talked about the jerk bait. I always wanna keep the bait above the fish. Same thing here. You wanna make the fish come up for the bait. I'm not gonna shake it like crazy. I'm gonna drop it on them, let the bait sit completely horizontal thanks to this 90-degree line tie, and I'm just gonna hold the bait still. If you've ever crappie fished before with a jig, I might even give it like a little shake and just slow rise as I see the fish react to it to make the fish think, hey, this bait's trying to get away from me. But what I'm not gonna do is sit down there and hop it like a jig and spoon. That's a big no-no, especially if there's a shad die off. So fish it slow. If I'm gonna cast it, I'll be live scoping, trying to get the bait away from the boat. I'm typically gonna throw a lighter weight than this. I'm gonna throw like an 8-ounce weight, which is incredibly difficult to do. So you're gonna have to have calm weather to do so. And I'm going to simply tight line this across the fish's head, giving it the slightest shake whatsoever. It's a fast shake, but a very subtle shake. I'm really just trying to make the bait roll as much as possible. Move the bait as little as possible. Try to keep it lifelike to match what they're feeding on. 2, if I'm dropping below, heavier weight. If I'm casting, lighter weight. And number 3, always keep the bait above the fish. Never let it go below. Thank you guys for tuning into the channel today to watch my top 5 baits for the winter time. If you guys want to see why I throw finesse tactics and how they make me a better pro angler, click the link right up here in the corner.